Hello, everyone. Welcome to NeuroVerse, the podcast that explores the rich and diverse world of neurodiversity. I'm your host, Ali Ahmed, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to celebrate and promote awareness for neurodiverse individuals and their unique perspectives. In each episode, we'll dive into stories, interviews, and discussions that highlight the experiences, challenges, and triumphs of those who think, learn, and experience the world differently. By creating this podcast, I not only want to create awareness, but also foster a supportive community for individuals with autism and neurological diversities. So, here we go. So for today's episode, the first episode, I have Mrs. H here, who is actually a mother with a child who was diagnosed with autism at a very young age. So can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes, hi, Ali. I can hear you.
Okay, great. So I'll just ask you a series of questions here. So for the first one, would you mind sharing a bit about your family and when you first noticed signs of autism in your child?
Yeah, I first wanted to say thank you for having me. And I think this is a wonderful podcast that you're doing. We definitely need more awareness in this world
Thank you for coming.
for our children. So yeah, to answer your question, I first noticed my child to be on the autism spectrum when he was maybe about 3 to 4 years old. At that time, I didn't know exactly what autism was. So I couldn't really pinpoint, what things I used to notice about him, but I noticed that he was, and just to preface a little bit, he has
Hmm.
very high functioning autism. So, and you must know that autism is a wide spectrum.
Yeah.
So there's kids which are nonverbal versus kids that can speak and talk and read just fine, but have more of the social issues. So my son actually fell on the high functioning autism in which he was never having the issues that maybe another mom would have had with her kid, in which he was nonverbal. So it was a little bit harder for me to actually understand. But when I did realize that he was different from kids his age, was probably around 3 years old.
Okay. Okay. Very interesting. And kind of as a follow up question to that, what was your experience like during the whole diagnosis process, and how did you feel when you received the official diagnosis?
So we didn't initially go for a diagnosis. It took us a little bit of time. I think, like I said, I noticed maybe around the age of 3. It took me a good 2 to 3 years after that to really come to terms with, yes, there is definitely something that he has that I perhaps am not going to be able to help him unless I get professional help, which is when I sought out um, uh, you know, uh, testing for autism. And the way that worked is I brought him to his pediatrician. She did some tests on him by observation, and she recommended a psychologist at a university hospital in the city that I live in.
Mm.
I researched that psychologist, that hospital. I brought him there, and over a series of several days in which I had to bring him in, and by this time he was probably 6 years old. Um, I had to bring him in several times, and they ran several behavioral testing on him, and he was in the room with the psychologist for hours at a time. And it was after that that I got the official diagnosis, and the official diagnosis came back as Asperger's
Okay.
syndrome, which used to be a term that the psychiatry department used to use for high
Yeah.
functioning
Hmm.
autism.
Okay. And on the same note, would you say that it was a smooth process, or it was a little tricky, or anything to say about that?
Yeah, honestly, it was not very smooth in the sense that as a parent, and this was, several years ago when there was less awareness
Hmm.
of this issue, you don't really know where to go. You don't know where to start. And even the pediatrician at that time was not 100% confident as to where to send me. But finally, when we did get through the hurdles and we got to the psychologist, after that, it was pretty smooth, I would say. But just to get the initial diagnosis, there's a lot of hoops and a lot of, roadblocks that you have to manage, at least back in the day that I had to do it. Yeah, it was not as smooth as I would have liked, but yes, we pushed through and we were able to get the help that we were looking for.
Okay, awesome. And I don't know how old your child is now, but can you describe a typical day in your household, or perhaps a day in the past when your child was a little younger, and how you manage daily routines and activities?
Yeah. So in my household, my child is the eldest. He has two younger siblings. He is about 17 years old right now. So a typical day is, like I said, he's always been very high functioning. So
Mm-hmm.
there's no issues with him having to need any special attention with his education. However, social issues were always the issue with him growing up. Understanding social cues, being able to make friends in a very natural way, that didn't come easy to him. Kids go out, and regardless of how shy you are or how outgoing you are, you're able to find kids that kind of mesh with your personality. But with
Mm-hmm.
somebody with Asperger's, it's a little bit more difficult because their brain is wired differently. So there was um, a lot of issues with him growing up in which, he would actually find more comfort in talking to adults or teachers because they were nicer and they just kind
Mm.
of, were kinder and understood him, whereas the kids on the playground would make fun of him because, instead of wanting to play dodgeball, he would want to talk about a salamander, which
Yeah.
was a little bit different from what other kids wanted to do. So there was that aspect of bullying, which he experienced quite a bit in his elementary school years, and started in pre-K and then went up until elementary school. Even in middle school, there was a lot of the pressure of needing to fit in, but not being able to fit in. So that was our biggest hurdle. Of how to overcome that. As far as daily routine at home, things were very, I would say, typical. He did need a little bit extra attention when it came to, maybe certain changes in the environment would maybe trigger him, which is, common amongst
Mm-hmm.
kids on the autism spectrum. But not so much. It wasn't very bad. I mean, he knew how to deal with things, but he did have more meltdowns because not being able to understand the social dynamics around him, which, we would have to deal with that and kind of just calmly explain things to him. But yeah, that's basically it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Um. Okay. So this is a little bit kind of similar note, but what are some of the biggest challenges you'd say you face as a parent of an autistic child, and how do you cope with these issues?
My personal experience with my child has been how to help him, uh, how to help him fit in
Mm.
and be happy with who he is. He understands that there is something different about him, and he celebrates that. And I'm very proud of him for that. But that doesn't stop the fact that he is not looked upon as the same as other kids. He's looked upon differently. And many times, because of that, he's treated differently because he acts a little differently. And even though he's come to terms with that is okay. And, we all our minds work differently in this world. And, he's fine with that. But there is somewhere that desire to fit in all the time.
Right.
And that is a little challenging. And that's one thing, we try to tell him is that, it's okay if you don't fit in. You don't always have to fit in. And acceptance is not something you should always be looking for. As long as you are comfortable in your skin and you are a confident person, that's it. But because of these issues that he's had to go for therapy. He's had to have counseling because kids that are on the autism spectrum, and the ones that are high functioning, like my child, they do deal with other issues such as depression, which is a common issue for them because they are so fatigued with always needing to fit in, with always wanting to be included and be like the rest of their peers. And no matter how hard they try, it doesn't come as naturally to them. And for that reason, they deal with depression. So that's been our biggest challenge. My biggest challenge has been to help him cope through that. And there's been some, good counseling out there, but it's not a very smooth process.
Okay. And I know you just spoke a little bit about the counseling and therapist sort of thing, but what type of support systems, including those, would you say you rely on, both formally and informally, such as like friends and family, to kind of help you handle this?
Honestly, Ollie, I'll tell you that it's been very difficult relying on psychologists or counselors. Yes, they are there. But autism is such a unique thing, and each kid is so unique in their own way. There's no counselor out there that knows how to deal specifically with your kid. They have training, general training of how to deal with kids on the spectrum. And they try their best, but you as a mom have to be their biggest counselor. You have to be their biggest cheerleader. You have to be their biggest, therapist. And that has been something that I've learned over the years. We could have multiple sessions of counseling, but your child more than any counselor can ever get to know them. And even the
Right.
long-term relationships with counselors, sometimes it's just not a good fit. And we've seen that. We've gone through several of them,
Mm-hmm.
which they didn't work for one reason or the other. But as a parent, you have to take on that responsibility to become that counselor that your child needs constantly. And family and friends have been perhaps the biggest support system because as a parent with a child with ASD, uh, it can be tiring as a parent and it can be exhausting, and sometimes you need to lean on your friends and your family to kind of guide you. Sometimes you run things by them. You kind of tell them, hey, this is what's going on. What do you suggest? And, oftentimes, more than not, they give you some really good advice. So, my personal experience has been that I've had a great support system that I have found in my family.
Okay.
Along with that, I'd like to say that the siblings
Mm-hmm.
of a child on the autism spectrum, for them also, sometimes they also have to take on the role of a counselor or just somebody that they can, that understands that, their sibling is going, has something which is unique to them and which is atypical, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who spend the most time, more than friends from school or more than any counselor. So
Yeah.
the family, what I'm trying to say is the family in general, in totality, has to step up. Not only the mom and the dad, but the siblings have to step up as well.
Okay. Great. Um. So, what misconceptions do you encounter about autism, just in public, and how do you address them, typically?
Um, some misconceptions that I would think off right off the bat is when somebody is high functioning, especially like in my situation, they may look like a typical child without any outward, there's nothing you can tell just by looking at my child that he has autism.
Hmm.
But yet when he speaks, it becomes a little apparent that he thinks a little differently. He speaks a little bit differently. And I've sometimes have noticed with maybe close family members that they they want to know how come we can't fix the issue by
Yeah.
just training him
Hmm.
to be better, or not better, better is the wrong word, by training him to talk like the other people at his
Yeah.
age.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I come across that. I've had, family members tell me that, just what's so hard? He's an intelligent kid. You just tell him don't say that and he shouldn't say that, or, speak in this way and he should speak in this way. But it doesn't work that way, and it's not that easy. His brain is wired differently. And even though he might know from the inside, it's hard. Those wires are there and they're different, and it's really hard. You can't just, no matter years of counseling or years of kind of helping him, um, teaching him skills that would put him more on the typical side than the atypical side. It doesn't work that way. It's not that easy. So that's a big misconception. I would say the biggest one that comes to mind right now.
Okay. Yeah. And then in the last few minutes we have, what advice would you give to parents, to other parents who are starting their journey with maybe they just found out their child is autistic or they have a very young child? What is there any advice you'd give to them?
Oh, um, yeah, I think for a parent with a child that they just found out, or they're just starting this journey, I tell them take a deep breath
Hmm.
and learn as much as possible about the autism spectrum disorder. There's a lot of myths out there. There's a lot of misconceptions out there. Don't, fall for those, and try to understand that your child is very unique to who he or she is. There's not going to be another child on the autism spectrum that will have the same exact issues as your child, which is why it makes this ASD, it makes it so unique, is because it is so varied from individual to individual. So
Yeah.
um, embrace the neurodiversity, love the neurodiversity. Your child is amazing just the way they are. They're not any less perfect than any other child. And that's just their perfection is displayed differently. And it's hard because, parents initially go through months and sometimes years of denial and not being able to cope with, is my child ever going to be quote unquote normal?
Hmm.
But yes, they are normal. That's their normal. And just the sooner you can understand that, the sooner you can embrace it and get them the counseling, the help, the facilities that they need to be the best version of themselves. And yeah, I think creating awareness and what you're doing, Ollie, is so important because there's not a lot out there where people know what is going inside the mind of a kid or what the family is dealing with. And I think, we need to talk about this more because there's bullying out there in school, and not just by students. There's bullying from adults because they don't understand kids. They think that this kid is just being unruly, this kid is being rude, this kid. No, it's not that they are being rude. It's because they socially just are not able to understand what to say and what not to say. And it's just the way their brain is wired. So to a young mom and a young dad who is dealing with this, um, be your child's biggest cheerleader, their biggest support system, and learn about this as much as possible so that you can have all the tools that you need to equip yourself to help them be the best version of themselves.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for that advice. And thank you for sharing this. I'm sure this is all very personal information. I surely learned a lot, and I hope the viewers did too. But yeah, thank you. Thank you for everyone for tuning in. And yeah, I hope you guys learned a lot from this. Yeah, thanks.